Hello, everybody. Welcome back to At Its Roots, exploring America's commitment to childcare. I'm your host, Tessie Reagan, and you're listening to part 2 of our episode, Split Roots. If you haven't heard part 1 yet, I encourage you to pause and go listen. But if you're ready to keep digging, let's jump in. We are going to be jumping in with our guest panelist, Dan Berman. I'm so excited, so I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Thank you for having me, Tessie. It's very exciting to be part of this opportunity. My name is Dan. I have been in early childhood for about 20 years now. I've been an infant teacher, a preschool director, and a literacy specialist, amongst many hats that I try not to all wear at the same time, as well as being the founder of Baby Step, a professional development source for early childhood educators around the world.
Well, thank you so much for being here and joining us in this really just important conversation. So what I want to do now is I want to open this up because this is just basically a conversation, and I want to ask you some warm-up questions. So I want to find out more about you, and I want those that are watching to know more about what brought you into this field. So when you think back to your earliest connections to childcare, as a child, a parent, or as someone that has been providing services, what do you remember most?
Yeah, so for me, it's kind of a blend of two of them. My first preschool job was at the preschool I attended as a child, and I ended up getting a summer job just as a floater working with different age groups. I had a male mentor, which was very rare. The owner of the preschool was a male educator who I looked up to and provided me this opportunity. And as I worked with the different age groups, I discovered that the younger and younger children that I worked with really aligned to my, joys in this field. And then the more I studied, the more I recognized how those first 100 days, 300 days of a child's life just have such a dynamic impact on everything going forward, and those who are, part of their lives, both parents and caregivers.
I love that. And it's so rare that you actually get to start working at the place that you were learning at when you were a kid. So I think it's rare for me because I'm a military child. Mm-hmm. And it's safe to say that that's probably what brought you into the field then.
I'd say it was, but really what kept me in the field. So I had lost my father when I was really young. So I ended up raising my younger sister is 7 years younger for a number of years. While my mom worked full time, we didn't have access to after school and all of that kind of stuff. So that kind of nurturing aspect is something that I both feel like I was born with. Both my mom and my sister are workers in the help caregiver field, and so I think some of that just came naturally. And then I've just been lucky to have opportunities where I've been given the space to kind of work with children, in different capacities, whether it be teaching infant massage, whether it be working with new fathers, whether it be supporting, educators in both childcare and family childcare. So for me, just kind of that ability to both care and help educators, young children, and parents. This is a field that really allows for so much of that if, you can get out from the systemic issues of affordability and time and access for so many.
That's very true. A lot of those systemic issues do cause problems within the field and with people trying to understand it that are outside the field. I think one of the biggest things that I've come across in the career is parents and legislators who assume that all of the money that we're getting from the parents and from the grants and stuff is pure profit.
Yeah. And it also is unfortunately scaled differently. We even start to think of schooling or childcare when it is about pre-K or getting ready for elementary school. A lot of my current work is in early literacy, And the research shows that from prenatal, before that baby is born, that they can understand the words that you're saying. And that first year is when so much of the learning about reading, but also the foundation of parents bonding over reading instead of
Yes.
screens or instead of, other activities is so important. But for a lot of parents, we now currently live in a society where a large number of our adults are functionally illiterate. And for many parents, we discover that they don't read to their kids just because they're not confident in their reading skills. They don't want to be embarrassed or look like they're not an expert in front of their kids because there's a matter of pride. But that becomes this long cycle. And it's not, again, we want our childcare providers to be viewed as educators and as teachers because they are. But realistically, they can only do so much within that scale. And then as you were talking about with the cost, I mean, materials are expensive, but also the scale of age groups, it's much more expensive to care for infants with smaller amounts of teacher-to-child ratios than it is for pre-K. So this concept of really only focusing state or federal funding towards supporting older children only makes it more expensive for parents who are trying to find early care when they're, trying to make sure they don't lose their job after if they have, maternity or paternity leave. They're trying to figure out, how to pay for diapers and things that are crazy expensive. And the same thing goes for providers. Parents, if they don't bring diapers in, that's not like that child's not getting changed. It's up to you as the adult to make sure that child, is clean. You have some diapers in your house, and those cost money. And so do school supplies and so on and so forth. So it really does become this intricate system that we all are trying to navigate and trying to understand. Well, there's so much, it costs so much. Where did all the money go? But when you really look at it closely, it's like, well, how is it only costing this much for, full-time care for a young child?
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things is that I don't think that people understand how much it actually costs at the end of the day to actually provide, because there's so many little things that people are not understanding about the cost. But I think when you get down to the history of childcare, that was by design. The way the system was set up and the way the system carried on. And so like the episode after this, we're going to go into how we're going to be going into World War II after this episode. And, when you start getting into how the system was designed, and none of it was designed with the thought process that children would be provided care outside their homes. But the economy is not set up for people to be able to stay home. And I think that's one of the issues that goes along with it. If you want parents to have the choice, because again, it should be a choice. And that's where this episode comes in. This is so... Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, it's both a blend of the system set up intentionally to withhold money from those providers, as a disservice, more or less. And it's also one that has become extremely gendered. I'm, quite a minority within this field as a man, while recognizing that I am not, a minority as a white presenting man in regular society. And that's a combination, the field getting that way of a belief and a stigma in what women's work are or what men's work are, that women are the nurturing caregivers and men need to be the primary breadwinners. But that mentality just means that we can't pay, this job to be a primary breadwinner, quote unquote, position, because it's not for the gender that makes the primary funds, which just sets that foundation for early childcare workers and teachers to be paid less as a whole. And as you move down the pyramid of privilege, it just weakens the, strength and capacity to, unionize or to barter for more wages or to ever tip those scales back, especially since the society is still has those strong, beliefs over gender roles.
Oh, yes. The strong beliefs over gender roles, I think, has impacted this field so hard. And it makes it so much harder, especially since, a lot of it again, you said it, that the way that they've set it up is it's not considered a breadwinning uh, field.
Mhm.
So men are not supposed to be in this field because men are supposed to be the breadwinners, except there's always been a point in time where women have had to step up and become the breadwinners in their families. And we shouldn't be impacted in our pay because you don't feel like this career field is valuable when it is. So now we're gonna get more into this because I think we started talking about all of this before I even got to a question. So like we again this the theme of the first episode was labor and racial identity in early childhood education. So now we're going to say, how did early ideas of caregiving and teaching become so gendered? And we did touch on that a little bit, and how that shaped the workforce we see in early childhood today. And I will say that growing up, I did not see men I didn't see men unless they were coaches.
Mhm.
In the even in the K through 12 education field. Every time I had an English or a history teacher, they were all coaches. I think the one male teacher that wasn't a coach was my psychology teacher. But in early education, it was very few far between to see a male in my early education. But interestingly enough, if they were principals, that's where you saw males in early education. They were principals, they're the directors. It's okay for them to be that way.
Yeah.
It wasn't seen as okay for them to be in the classroom. And I didn't understand that because I had male figures in my life they were teaching me how to ride bikes. I never learned properly, but that's not their fault. I got problems.
Mm.
But they were teaching me to ride bikes. They made me tough. I was outside trying to play football in a yellow tulip dress and matching shorts and climbing trees and trying to beat up boys. But this was because I joined the military, but this was because I had men in my life that didn't make me feel like me being a girl should stop me from doing anything. And me being a tomboy / frilly girl really wasn't supposed to stop me doing anything. I can do whatever I want.
Yes, as it should be.
Yes. And I feel like that's what and I feel like that having those positive experiences with male figures in my life has shown me how important it is for early education to have men in the classroom, men in the field. Sure. We need men in this field. They bring something that we as women can bring something to the field, and men bring something to the field. And I think, yeah, I had mom and a grandma and all of those women that I looked up to that were strong and everything. But then when you have outside voices telling you that girls aren't allowed to play football, girls aren't allowed to do this, and I have a positive male role figure telling me, you don't need to listen to them, you do whatever you want, that's going to take precedence over the negative voices telling me that I can't. And I think that's what's missing.
Yeah. And I love hearing you say that. I mean, I'm a huge advocate of the benefits of having males in early childhood, again, because of that ability to model different, good behaviors from a gender, though they don't have to be, siloed. It doesn't, just because you're a man, you don't have to teach the tough things and do the rough and tumble play. Just because you're female doesn't mean you have to be the nurturer. And that's part of what we need to, get out of our heads in this societal, expectation of what gender roles should be, because that creates some of the stigma for, some men that I knew, that started in the field. A lot of them went the path that you described. They started as a teacher, but then they just went immediately to administration, even though they had no interest in it, because that's just where the salary capacity was. And amazingly, they have more opportunities as men than the female staff, and it shouldn't be that way either. And the younger the child, the less percentage of male educators in their life. So college administrator, president, and then you start going down and down. It's a great point that you brought up. talked about the preschool I started at. Well, the male figure was he was the owner. He wasn't, a teacher. The only other male that was there was the owner's son. And when I came on, part of my floater job was to lead the outdoor, phys ed activities. So it's
Yes.
not like I wasn't kind of pigeonholed, and I'm okay with that. I enjoyed it, but it still was, even in a very atypical introduction to the field, it was still very, typically forced in there. And
That's what the men do
yeah,
and everything and stuff. And that was, and at you know, I will say that being in this field for as long as I have, everybody assumes that little girls are so sweet and so kind and so gentle. And it was always my little girls that who, when they were playing in the dramatic play area, they were the ones shoving BBs in the ovens. And I'm like, why is the BB in the oven?
yeah. And I
Oh my
tend to find
God.
that girls individually will keep that sweet, but when you get three or four, toddler to preschool age girls in a dramatic play, they have the, largest capacity for any number of.
Yes. But I think it's funny because I've always, everybody was like, oh, boys are so rough, boys are this. And I was like, okay, so if you're talking in terms of toys, sometimes boys can be rougher with toys. But when you're talking about like natural, like being naturally just empathetic
Yeah.
and very aware of other people's feelings, I found that sometimes for boys, it seems like because they're told by society that they're not supposed to be that way, it kind of they start hiding it around that time period and everything. Except I've noticed that boys are extremely sweet. I've got two boys of my own and everything, and they were super sweet and they were kind, they're empathetic, they notice when people are upset,
Yeah.
and everything. And I think pigeonholing little boys, and not letting them show those emotions and everything is not great. And I think this is where male caregivers come in because they can see them model that it's okay to have feelings.
Absolutely. And even in cases, we have a lot of children being raised by single moms or co-parenting by a mom and a grandma. So they need, a male influence, generally in their life. Just quickly before we wrap this question with a little, anecdote. So I was running a school and I had a boy, we'll call him Tank, which was what the parents called him. And he was getting sent to my office a number of times. Very large child, but I discovered he was very soft-spoken, very emotionally fragile, and things like he would push to get to the front of the line, but it's because you discover like he didn't think he'd be able to get to something, or
Yes.
and you just start making those adaptations. And I asked him, and he said, I don't like that name. I like my regular name. And again, it's just something where, because of his physical size, it was a cute nickname, but it became his identity by the time he was 4, an identity that he had no desire really to be in, but it's the only way he found he was getting attention or was expected, to be. And
And he leaned into it.
and so for a lot of us, again, taking a male nurturing figure or a female, more rough and tumble figure, a female rough and tumble teacher probably would notice that's not this person, this child doesn't match me. This is just the name doesn't match. But when you get a very traditional, female older teacher who just thinks like everybody fits in their little boxes, or or male, it doesn't have to be gendered. It tends to be a lot of what we grew up being told to expect or being told is the case in stereotypes or in, quick biases. We have to recognize that each child's individual and they need the full scope of our care. It takes a village, and none of us have to be that village by ourselves.
And I love that. I love that. And I think I agree very much that, it's a shame that this field is so gendered. And I hope that this is the start of a very lengthy conversation about how, we can try and ungender it.
Yeah. Well, and part of the work we do at Baby Step, I've partnered with some male childcare educators that are trying to make impacts. And there are individuals both in the UK and Australia who have made large gains for community engagement. There are always, some step backs or stigmas, whether it be, a single case of abuse or a single, individual that shouldn't be in the field because the background checks weren't done. But on the whole, I've noticed that both those two countries have been and regions have been really pushing forward the both equity for gender roles in a form of both, role modeling and getting more what we call human capital into the field. We're not just
Yes.
having half the population being able to care for children, but then also the hope is that downstream moves the expectation up as a professional field when you get more men, because unfortunately, that's how we've structured our perceptions of business.
Yes, that's exactly it. And then so we're running short on time, and that's probably my fault. This was a really good conversation. So but I have just two more questions, and I think one of them is like, um the roots, and that's my timer saying that we are supposed to be done. We're just
We
going to
can do
keep
the last
going a
two
little
questions. We'll
bit.
keep going, and you can just crop
Yeah.
it.
And then I think is do you think the roots of this field still impact the way women of color, and I think men at a certain point, because men are not encouraged to be in the early education classroom, they're encouraged to be the administrators of early education programs, are often denied the title of teacher or educator. And I think for me, the answer is yes. When you have a field that will, yeah, because when you have a field that has been started on exploitation of people's labor, not wanting to pay people, basically threatening people into doing the job, and everything, you're going to get people that carry that type of bias, even if they're unaware, forward. It's going to be a generational thing.
Yeah, and language makes a huge impact. Calling somebody a teacher versus a babysitter versus a childcare worker versus childcare professional. These are all things that allow for the flow of money to be easier to accept or not be provided.
That's very true. And when you are not respected and you don't feel like the educator that you went to school for, I have my master's degree, but when I tried to get a job at a childcare and with a bachelor's, they wanted me to come in from 6:30 till 6:30, and they only wanted to pay me $11 an hour. And I was like, but I have a bachelor's degree. And later on, I would find out that they hired someone else because I turned it down, and they paid them more, but they didn't look like me and stuff. They wanted me to do all the lesson planning. They wanted me to do all of the interactions with the parents. Like, I was going to be doing every single thing from 6:30 to 6:30 in one classroom, but I was expected to only be paid $11 an hour. Oh, but I still had to also pay for my child's attendance.
And I'm glad you didn't end up there, but I'm also glad that you were able to find other opportunities, because unfortunately that isn't a lot of people have to take what they're given, or they feel like they have to take what they're given. That's what they deserve. And that's not the case at all.
No, and I think some of that also comes from the way that this country has made it taboo to ask others about what they're being paid.
Sure.
Because when you can't find out what the standard is, you don't know that you are being taken advantage of.
Yeah, and that's a great.
And that's
exploitation based on race and gender, but there's also exploitation based on those with the wealth and those who are the workers, and that's been systemic in so many fields in the history of this country. But it's always the people of color, and then the women of color who again take the biggest brunt of the disrespect and disconnect between where it should be and where it is.
Yes. And I think that's probably the most insulting of some of the things that are happening currently, I refuse to say DEI only because people are being purposely obtuse about what it is. It's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when they're saying that you are a DEI hire, it's very much, well, yes, it's very coded. And I know I deserve my positions. I know I deserve all of my titles, but someone not being able to explain why they think that my education and my experience doesn't count simply because I'm a Black person in that field is very aggravating, very aggy. I get very
So I know, and DEI has gotten popularized and then, villainized. I like the term Jedi B, which is justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Because to me, you can't have equity without justice. It lays that foundation because, again, we live in an unjust system right now. Without trying to fix some of the systemic issues, we can't really get to equitable opportunities. Belonging, trying to make sure that now we're not only inclusive, but that we're making people feel welcome once they're, included. It doesn't, if we're hiring one male teacher for every school, it doesn't matter who the man is or what their background is, but we're going to pay them higher. So we get one man in every school. That does nobody any good either, even if that one man is great. And even if that one man makes a difference on the lives of those children, it just, again, perpetuates this unequitable system.
right. And I think it's not helpful when people that's basically how they view DEI policy, diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and affirmative action. When statistically, Black women and women of color that are in the field did not actually benefit from affirmative action as much as people were trying to put out that we did. We did not. It did what it was supposed to, in general terms, but at the root of it, because people were misunderstanding what it was supposed to be, I think that was one of the pitfalls, and it should have been reevaluated by people who actually do the work to reevaluate their biases. So now, this also leads us into our question, because not being called a teacher is an equitable issue. So the last question is, what does an equitable early childhood field look like to you?
To me, it means that opportunities are expanded. We use our entire potential workforce and we pay them a living wage. And then we increase that pay from that foundation based on experience and skills. I know we wrap up here, we had kind of talked right before we had started this about, was there a story or something that really stuck to me about equity, that I wanted people to take away? And I'll close kind of, this encapsulates for me where I've been driven. My first teaching job, which I was hired as a childcare worker, but called myself a lead teacher. And I called the assistant childcare worker my assistant teacher. I was just finished, got my master's degree, and my assistant teacher was a newly immigrated Asian American woman who did not speak any English. I was told that I could be with the infants all day, but I was not allowed to change their diapers, because that was the stigma around potential, sexual abuse. There were concerns. And to me, it's, if you're going to trust me with your children all day, and I've been background screened, again, there should be no difference. And what I was told is, well, don't even worry about it. You have an assistant teacher. She can just do all the diaper changing and you can do all the teaching. And to me, that would have been an easy answer. I don't want to change, dirty diapers, but her job should not be to make minimum wage to change diapers all day. Diaper changing is also a great opportunity to bond with children because it's a direct one-on-one opportunity. And to me, and it goes against everything I believe for, equity and privilege and, that kind of stuff. So instead of just accepting that, I went and I got signatures from every one of my parents, and some of them were hesitant. And again, to me, that's so weird that you're hesitant on this aspect, but not on the other 10 hours a day I'm with your child. And I took those letters to the governor's office. And we got the policy changed for the county. And so things like that, were there any other men that, that policy ended up impacting? I have no idea. I could have been the only man for the next, 4 years in that area working in a diaper changing age group. But to me, just one, not just accepting that this type of person, because of their title or because of, their experience or their gender or their race, should do X type of role within childcare and not something else. And you, because of your demographics and your background, should do Y. That to me is not only not equitable, it's the antithesis of what I want the children and the families to be, expecting from quality childcare, from a quality, teacher and role model in their children's lives. And, for you having mixed age children that you're working with, it's always a constant, making sure that the children feel that they have an equitable, experience, yes, that you're giving each of them different needs, and that on the whole, our childcare system, again, is equitable, meaning the staff who are working are not paying more than they're making in order to, do this kind of work. It should not be exploitative. It should be a profession that is valued and, paid in that kind of way in the marketplace, because that's the system we've set up. And then conversely, making sure that, those who just have a male gender or have a degree should be sped up to administration if that's not their skill set, is also, not the case. So we're going to need, more individuals who have not had that access to positions of influence and to have seats at the table. Because again, having that seat at the table really allows for a lot of these potential changes, even on the margins, to be made. If you're not there, they like to say, if you're not at the table, you're dinner. So
very true.
We have to make sure that, again, we have access to high quality childcare without restricting, by gender or by race, who can care for those children, as long as they are safe and they are, nurturing and want to help those children learn. And then making sure that as a society, we value the profession in that role so that more people want to go into that work as well, especially as we get more AI and more technology taking certain types of jobs. There's always going to be a need for caring human individuals to provide direct education and care for our children.
This is very true. I do think, real quick, I do think there is a shrinkage in what was called white collar jobs and office jobs. And we're going to see people working these odd hours, more people working on traditional hours. There's going to be more people that are going to be going into more service-oriented jobs. And there is nothing wrong with that. But knowing that, and watching the childcare field kind of collapse in on itself because of the bias and racism and gendering that is going on within the field is very scary. We're going to have whole families that are not going to have access. And I think that's one of the things some of the legislators are missing. You are worried about the shrinking population of the United States, but the shrinking population of the United States is worried about just taking care of themselves.
And if we have a shrinking population, we need to make sure that we are caring for those lesser number of individuals so that they are raised in a healthy environment where they want to grow up and produce, more children who, are caring and empathetic and able to contribute to society.
Right. If you don't do that, it's not going to happen. You taking away childcare is meaning more people are going to decide not to have children because you're not investing in the system that they're going to need. Well, I want to say thank you to Dan for sharing your truth and experience. If we want a stronger future for childcare, we have to understand that what's underneath. Follow Added Truths for more stories and real solutions, and join us next time as we dig into how wartime policies and exclusion shape the field. I'm Tessie Reagan. Keep thinking about childcare at its roots.